I am Professor Lynn Porter of Fairfield University, and this is my Intro to Theater lecture on actor-audience relationships and how they relate to the different kinds of performance spaces. In this lecture, I'm going to cover stage directions, which will help us as we look at all of the different stage setups. Then we are going to look at the three main different stage setups, the arena stage, the thrust, and the proscenium stages. And then we're going to talk about the effect that those stage setups have on the actor-audience relationship, on the experience we have as audience members. So we're going to look at how the physical arrangement impacts the audience's experiments, as well as the adjustments that both the actors and the audience members need to make. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about how the scenery has to be changed depending on each of these stage arrangements. So, starting with stage directions, we are now looking down on the floor of a performing area. So that's what that big rectangle is. And it's been divided up into 9 different spaces, kind of like a tic-tac-toe board. And I want to point out that the audience is at the bottom of this diagram. And you have to understand several concepts here. You have to understand up and down. Down is toward the audience. So up is away from the audience. And then you have left and right. Right is to the audience's left. What is that? Actually, right is to the actor's right. If an actor is standing in the middle of the stage facing the audience, and the audience is at the bottom of this diagram, the actor's right is stage right, and the actor's left is stage left. Once you get those concepts, you can start filling in the blanks. We have down right and down left, up right and up left, and those are the abbreviations we usually use. One more idea you have to wrap your head around, and that is the concept of center. And I've put a C in the middle there, so that would be what we call center. Sometimes we call it center center. And now we can fill in all of the rest of the squares. We have down center, up center, center right, and center left. So these are the various directions that we use all the time to talk about how we maneuver a person on the stage or where something is. Walk upright and sit in the upright sofa, not the up left sofa, sit in the upright sofa. Those are the kinds of conversations we have in the theater all the time. And we have to understand these stage directions so we can have a conversation about these different setups, these different theater setups. Okay, let's get started in looking at the theaters. Here we have a ground plan view of an arena stage. In fact, this is the arena in Houston, aptly named. Isn't this interesting? Let's look at this. Where is the actual performing area? It's in the very center. It's that circle in the center. And then there's an orchestra pit downstage of that. And then around it in concentric rings, you have all of the audience. And then behind the audience, you have the bar, the lighting booth, the sound, all of the different offstage areas are furthest away from the stage. You also have these aisles moving from outside to inside. You see a number of aisles. They're all numbered at this theater from 1 to 15. We call those VOMs, V-O-M. Those are the aisles through the audience. Now, an arena stage doesn't have to be round. It can be square. It can be any shape, actually, but the defining feature of an arena stage is the fact that the audience surrounds the playing area. No matter where an actor turns on the stage, they're going to be facing audience members and turning their back to audience members. So obviously this takes some getting used to for actors as well as audience members. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Here is a wonderful picture of an empty arena stage. Think about what it would be like to see a play in this arrangement. Think about what it would be like to be performing in that central area. Think about the limitations this places on scenery. So those are the defining features of an arena stage. We also call this theater in the round. One of the reasons why we don't always use that term is, as I've shown you, it's not always round. So I want to move along to our second theater arrangement, and this is a thrust. Here you see a stage in the upper part of your diagram. And the performing area, the stage area, has audience on three sides. So there is a backstage area, upstage of the performing area, as well as two VOMs. We still see those VOMs. And if you're wondering about, wait a minute, the VOMs look like they just dead end into audience. Actually, those VOMs, they go down and under those seating areas. So in some ways, the thrust stage shares features with the arena stage, but not totally, right? And here is a lovely photograph of an actual thrust stage. It's called a thrust stage because the performing area actually thrusts out into the audience area. And again, the defining feature of a thrust stage is the audience surrounds three sides of the performers, but you can see with that purple drapery area that there is a backstage or an upstage where there is not audience on the fourth side. And the last form of a stage setup I want to talk about is the proscenium stage. That's a word to lift your hat to, proscenium. And in a proscenium stage, you have the stage at one end. You see it's there at the top of our diagram. And then you have row after row after row after row after row of audience area. Now, many students tend to think of a proscenium stage as a normal stage. And I would like to disabuse you of that. It may be the stage setup that you are most comfortable with or most familiar with, but actually, if you look at the growth of theater over the millennia, it is the most recent stage to develop. Shakespeare was performing on a thrust stage, and the arena stage is an idea that goes back as far as ancient Greece. So the proscenium stage is the newest stage. And there you have a lovely photograph of a proscenium stage. This looks like any number of stages that we find in New York, especially in the Broadway district, where you have the lovely grand drape, called that because it's a drapery and it's very grand. And then the parallel rows of audience moving away and of course up. And I want to point out in this photograph, the reason why a proscenium stage is called that is because there is a proscenium arch. That is the picture frame that surrounds the actual stage area. So the idea in a proscenium stage is that we are looking through this beautiful frame into this other world of the stage. So those are the three stage setups I want to discuss: the arena, the thrust, and the proscenium, and you have to have your hands around all of this terminology. But now come the really interesting questions. For each one of these theater arrangements, I'm going to ask, what is the nature of the physical distance or the physical closeness, the intimacy between the actor and the audience member in each of these setups? And then I'm going to ask about how that relates to the emotional intimacy or the emotional distance between the actor and the audience. We'll then consider what adjustments the actor has to make in performing in these various setups. and what adjustments the audience members need to make as they are experiencing a play in these various setups. So let's examine the impact on the audience members' experience. In the arena setup, the audience is close to the performers. In fact, this is the most physically intimate arrangement that we have. It is simply a fact that the more sides of a performing space has audience members on it, the closer you can get people to the performers. And it's obvious that there is no barrier that separates the two worlds, the world of the stage and the world of the audience. In fact, experiencing this kind of setup makes an audience member feel like they're part of a conversation. In fact, it's very common in the arena setup for an actor to turn to an audience member to catch that person's eye and ask them a question, of course, in character. But that forces the audience member to feel like, oh, wow, now I have to respond. So that leads to the sense that it is very emotionally intimate. But there's another thing going on here, not just a conversation between the audience and the performer. As an audience member, you are very much aware that there are other audience members there. In fact, you can see the actor on stage, and behind that person, you can see audience on the other side of the theater. So you become highly aware of other audience members and their reaction. And it does tend to put us on our best behavior. When we know we're being watched, we adjust our behavior. If we think no one can see us, we adjust our behavior in a different way. So our best behavior tends to come about when we are seated in a circle. And I want to unpack the idea of a circle here a little bit more. There are times in life that we sit in a circle. There are times that we tend to share things. What are important times in life when we sit in a circle? When we're small children and we're being read to, we tend to sit in a circle. When you're an athlete and you huddle up, you get into a circle. When you're camping and there's a fire and it's dark, we gather around a circle. All of these are experiences that are community building. We get a sense of belonging to a group when we sit in a circle. In fact, we get this sense when we're sitting around a Thanksgiving dinner table with our family and loved ones. There's a communal experience that happens about the special shape of a circle. Some of you may know about King Arthur, the mythical King Arthur of England, and his knights, the Knights of the Round Table. King Arthur decided that he wanted a very different piece of furniture built for his group of knights, and it was a round table, so there is no head to the table. So all of the knights seated at that round table are on an even playing field. They all have the same rank. They all have the same responsibility to whatever is going on. So even the concept of a round table goes back to this idea of communion. And I want to go back to that idea of a campfire. For those of us who have camped out of doors, if you've ever had the experience of walking away from the fire into the darkness, you're aware really quickly of, wow, it's really dark. I mean, it's like dark, dark, and it's cold, and I'm so far away from those people, and it's kind of scary out here. And we feel pulled back to that communal experience and the safety of being in that circle, the safety of being in that herd. Human beings are herd animals. We long to be together. So the circle really reinforces that for us. And so when we're in a theater experiencing an event where you have this circle thing going on, it's easier for us as an individual audience member to connect to the larger circle of the audience. Isn't that kind of cool? So now let's move along and think about the impact that the thrust stage has on the audience member's experience. In a thrust, the audience is close to the performers. Not necessarily as close as you get in an arena stage. It depends on how many seats there are in the theater, but you're still close because you're surrounding that performing area. So it tends to be a little bit less physically intimate than the arena stage we were just considering, but it is definitely more physically intimate than we get with a proscenium house. We still don't have any barrier separating the world of the stage and the world of the audience. So just as with an arena, the audience feels like they're part of an onstage conversation. Actors can look directly into an audience member's eye and catch them in that conversation, which puts the audience members it raises their awareness of having to hold up their end of a conversation. Think about it. If an actor looks you right in the eye and says, "I am so confused, I don't know what to do. What do you think?" As an audience member, aren't you immediately going to feel like, "Whoa, well, now I need to respond," right? So there's a lot of times in plays when actors and characters are trying to figure out what they should do, and they consider these questions. What should I do here? But when it's delivered intimately between a performer and directly to one individual audience member, that puts everybody in the audience on alert. Oh, wow, now I have to respond. And even if I don't respond with words, I have to respond with my attention. But because we do not have audience members thoroughly encircling the performing area, the space can feel a little less emotionally intimate than you get with the arena experience, but definitely more emotionally intimate than with the proscenium house. And just as with arena, you are still highly aware of other audience members. And again, that puts us on our best behavior. Every audience member in this theater can see other audience members without even trying to. So that is one feature of the thrust experience. But one of the big differences between thrust and arena is we have lost that magic connection of the circle, because there now is an upstage to the playing area. So we no longer have that circle experience. So let's think about a proscenium theater. When you are an audience member in a proscenium house, you are the most physically distanced that you can possibly be in a theater. Now, you may think, wait a minute, the people in the front row are just as close as the people in the front row of an arena or a thrust stage. And while that is absolutely true, it doesn't feel that way. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more in a minute. Now we see that we have a frame or a barrier that separates the two worlds, and you have the sense that the audience is peeking into the conversation. And if you've ever performed on a proscenium stage, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a definite barrier because of the lighting. The light forms a glare in the actor's eye or the dancer's eye, and there is a sense when you're on a stage with all the lights on that there is this great black hole on the other side of the proscenium arch. So it's almost impossible to look an audience member in the eye and catch their eye, like I was talking about in the other actor-audience relationships. There's a definite barrier, even if you're thinking, well, I can see through this picture frame thing here. There's an emotional barrier there and a physical one that comes with the light. And because of this seating arrangement, it is easy to become emotionally detached from whatever's going on stage. In fact, you have to consciously work to engage and to stay engaged in a play. You get a sense in a proscenium house that you can hide from the other audience members. They can't see me. I can't see them. I'm aware of the handful of people who are directly in front of me, but otherwise I feel absolutely invisible. Oh, I can text and no one's going to even notice. I can do it very surreptitiously. Or I can have a conversation with someone and no one's going to care. Where when that's not true, a lot of people care. But you get the sense that you can hide from other audience members. So just as the arena and the thrust stages tend to put us on our best behavior because we're very much aware other people can see us, that's not true in a proscenium house. And negative behavior can actually happen in the audience, or behavior that is just not connected to what's going on stage. So I hope you can see that each one of these theater arrangements has a radically different effect on the kind of experience that your audience member is going to have. So let's move along to the adjustments that the actors and the audience members need to make in all three of these arrangements. Actually, I'm going to unpack this for both arena and thrust together because the adjustments are almost identical between the two. One of the big focuses for the actor is how they move on stage. Because everywhere you go on stage, you're standing in front of someone and behind someone, just because of where the audience members are, actors have to move frequently and they tend to play the diagonals. They tend to stand diagonally across from one another and move frequently so that the audience member doesn't feel like they got a seat behind a column. Moving frequently is important so you're never playing only to one side of the audience. Every audience member wants to have the same experience, so the actors have to facilitate that by moving frequently and playing diagonals. Also, how do actors face one another? Just like in real life, when you're having a conversation with a friend, your shoulders are parallel to their shoulders. You stand and you look directly at someone and you talk to them. And that's exactly what happens in the arena and the thrust stage. And then actors have to speak very clearly because the audience can't always see their mouths. We tend to do a tremendous amount of lip reading. So if we are looking at the back of an actor who is having a conversation with someone, we have to read their back and we have to hear them very, very clearly. So actors have to very much focus on their enunciation so that they are heard and throughout the theater space. As an audience member, you would think that you would have a very difficult time with this, but actually it happens quite quickly. Very quickly, you get used to seeing actors' backs. In fact, we see people's backs all the time in life. If you're looking in on a conversation in the cafeteria, you're going to probably be seeing someone's face and you're probably going to be seeing someone's back. We're very used to seeing backs and reading reactions off of people's backs and other people's faces. As audience members, we also very quickly adjust to the fact that we can see other people and that we are being seen by other people. It's easy to assume that audience members are going to be distracting in the arena and thrust arrangement. Generally not. The audience members tend to be quite engaging. So not only are you watching the performers on stage, you're also aware of how the rest of the audience is reacting. And you may find an audience member on the other side of the stage who is having a fascinating reaction to the play, and you kind of fold that into your experience of the play. It's just like overhearing a conversation when you're in a crowded room full of people. You read the audience members as much as you read the performers. And all of this is part of that intimacy, that emotional intimacy that happens with the performances in both arena and thrust. So let's look to see what kinds of adjustments actors and audience members need to make in a proscenium house. Okay, for actors, they tend to have to face down stage, which is a very unnatural position to be in when you're having a conversation with someone. It's called playing open. So actors always want to be facing the audience. And we're trained to face the audience. So you end up having these conversations where you're sort of standing beside someone, pretending that you're facing them, but you're really not. You're playing open so that both of you are facing out into the audience. It's a very unnatural body position that actors have to learn to deal with. Also, because there really is no place on stage that an actor is aware their back is turned to an audience, actors can plant themselves and stay in place. Planting basically means they don't have to move around very much. So they can plant themselves, stay in one place, and just perform from one position. In fact, in the opera world, they call it park and bark, where an opera singer stands in place and simply sings. That's called park and bark. I find that very funny. Okay, also, actors need to be aware that not only do you have audience members in the front row, you also have audience members in the very, very, very back row, way back there. So the actors have to play to the back of the house. That means you have to speak loudly enough that your voice gets all the way back there. You have to tip your head up and tip your body open so you're playing up and out to the audience. And by playing to the back of the house, that tends to make the people in the front row feel like the play is literally going over the top of their heads. And I mean that physically, like the play is extended in the air up over the audience members. So while I mentioned earlier that the people in the front row might you might think they have as intimate a connection as people in the front row of an arena or thrust, that's not the sense at all. Even in the front row, you don't feel as connected. And as an audience member, as I said before, you have to work to stay engaged. You have all of these things working against you as an audience member. You have the physical distance, you have the lack of a communal experience with the other people in the audience, you have a sense that the play isn't really being performed for you, you have a sense you could be hiding. All of that tends to work against the audience members. So as an audience member in these situations, we have to continually work to stay engaged. Now you may be thinking, wait a minute, I have seen any number of plays in a proscenium theater, and every single one of them I enjoyed, I connected to, I had that amazing theater experience. I'm not saying proscenium theaters don't work. The whole theater thing still works. You still opt in as an audience member and you suspend your disbelief and you go on the emotional journey that our characters go on. You still have that even in a proscenium house. My point is, in a proscenium theater, you are less connected. It is easier to connect emotionally in the arena and the thrust stages. I'm not saying you can't connect. I'm just saying the connection isn't as strong. So it's a relative thing I'm talking about here. Okay, let's move along to talking about how the scenery has to be adjusted for these three different arrangements. In the arena theater, it's pretty obvious there's no room for big scenic pieces. There's no ability to put walls on stage, doors on stage. Seriously, think about it. Even if you have a wall with a door, you're going to have a problem in an arena stage. So the scenery in an arena tends to focus on the floor and the furniture because that's the only thing that will still allow all of the audience members to be able to participate in the experience. You may have some vertical scenery, maybe not walls. You may have a doorway in a VOM so that we can see that, oh, I'm entering into the house and it may be just there in the VOM, but probably wouldn't even have the door in it, just the door opening. So there is some possibilities for vertical scenery, but that is mostly contained to the VOM areas. What about the scenic adjustments we have to make in a thrust? Well, now we have that upstage area, and it demands some form of a scenic treatment. In the photograph I'm showing you, it demands that beautiful purple curtain. And if that curtain were open, we would want to see something in there beside the back wall of the theater, which is probably brick. So it demands some kind of a treatment. But now we have this thrust area too that demands some kind of a floor treatment. Is it grass? Is it a parquet floor? Is it a stone floor? So we have kind of a combination of the demands of an upstage area that need to have maybe walls and doors and entrances and pieces of houses or pieces of castles or forests. So that may be going on upstage, but then we also have the possibility of some vertical scenery in the VOMs. So the thrust tends to be a combo of what happens in an arena space and what happens in a proscenium space. And then in a proscenium, you have that proscenium arch that demands to be filled with something. There's got to be something going on up there other than a big empty space. Proscenium theaters are the theaters that have the most emphasis on visuals imagery, on scenery. This is why when we go to a Broadway theater, we're used to seeing spectacle. We're used to seeing exciting things visually. It's because Broadway houses, most of them, are proscenium houses. Now, there's one theater arrangement that I haven't talked about here. It's not listed on this slide. I haven't talked about a black box theater. Black box theaters were the invention of the middle of the 20th century, where the space is literally a black box and the actor audience relationship can be arranged any way you want. The audience seating areas in a black box are not fixed, they're not attached to the ground. So you could feasibly have a proscenium stage or a thrust stage or an arena stage, depending on how you arrange the audience and the performance space within the black box. And that is frequently a big decision that the director and the scenic designer need to make if they're working in a black box situation. So there you have it. We've looked at the stage directions that we use for all the stages. We've looked at physically the differences between the arena, thrust, and proscenium stages. And then we've talked about the impact on the audience experience, the adjustments actors and audience members need to make, and the adjustments we have to make in terms of scenery. That's what I wanted to share with you about the actor-audience relationship and how it is affected by the performance spaces. Thank you for your attention.